I'm going to present not on the services that our business provide, but on the Economic Policy Research Association report that we recently published, subsequent to some regulatory changes that happened last year. At first, I understand this is being recorded, so we do it also for the benefit of those that may look at this afterwards and hopefully take the message further, because we think it's quite an important message. So at first, I'm just going to quickly introduce EPRA to you. And Tanya, thank you very much for inviting me. And Professor Kutsia is one of the managing members of EPRA. So also thank you very much, Prof. No, it's you, yes. Thank you very much for making time also to join us here. All right, so EPRA is a voluntary association. It was founded in 2017. And there was a bit of a run-up until EPRA was founded, mainly a group of people coming together, becoming worried about the policy environment in Namibia, and that we are becoming regressive, and that we will pay the economic consequences for that. The main point of contention, or law bill of contention at the time, being NIF. I'm sure you've read about it lots and lots of times in the papers, but also the not so familiar investment bill of that time, which became an act, which also had numerous shortcomings, and it's still in the making. The replacement, one of the replacements was built by the Minister of Trade, withdrawn within 2 or 3 days. It was an absolute disaster. So EPRA kind of involves itself in that area where we want to, at least from civil society's side, raise the red flags to also let people understand that we have to analyze these policies and laws, and we have to understand that they have consequences. If we just accept that the government knows everything and that the direction that they take us in is going to be a good, the right direction, then we might find ourselves in a bit of a pickle, as many other countries, and especially South Africa, has done. So me and Roland Brown decided to start a voluntary association just as some platform to bring businesses together and to see if we can make a difference. Very much like the 29ers are doing in so many fronts, and it is, I commend you for your movement, and especially involving the youth, because one thing that gets kind of forgotten in our country is that the youth now in Namibia constitutes 65% of our population. So the youth is the driving force. The youth will bring the necessary direction and changes that we need to make our country a better place, and we have to admit it's not in the optimal place currently. Good. So what's the objectives? EPRA wants to advocate for pragmatic, sustainable, pro-growth, and investment-friendly economic policy. If you feel that that's not the right direction, stop it right now, and then we can have a discussion on why we feel that's the right direction, as opposed to communism, Marxism, socialism, and all the other isms that's out there that's being promoted by some activists. So by extension, EPRA wants to advocate for pragmatic job creation and the improvement of the current inequality we experience, the highest pretty much in the world. We've got 35 paying members, so don't feel bad. Everything has got a small beginning, but we do have 471 supporting members. These are mostly corporates that support it. We have a management committee that oversees EPRA's projects and finances. That's Gideon Chilongo. You might know him from Ultra List, Jamie Smith, and Professor Kutsia joined us today. Our main activities, in essence, is the analysis of government policy. Because that's ultimately the biggest driving force of where our country is going, is when government decides that's the direction we are going. And we have to make sure that that's an optimal direction. And if it's not, we have to put warning lights out there and see if we can create a debate to improve things. We make a point of delivering our reports, and I brought some reports with me today, so please feel free to take one. Just for now already, put a few on the chair. You can take one at any time you want. So we bind those reports and we deliver them to the policymakers by hand. Ministers, deputy ministers, planning commission, NIPTIP, and I'm glad that your previous session had Wanja here, because that and the other one that you mentioned on governance falls quite nicely into this presentation as well. So that we make sure at least we have, let's say, peace of mind that the policymakers can never later turn around and say, but you never spoke to us, never talked to us, you never informed us about your concerns or analysis. So we make a good effort in doing that. We have quite a few reports and the nice other goodies that you are more than welcome to retrieve at our website, epra.cc/downloads. And you can also, there's also a portal to become a member. So everything that you want from EPRA and the Constitution, everything is uploaded there. So, why nations fail? That's a book by Affirmative and Robinson. Who's read that book? One. Tanya, you don't look convinced though. Long ago. Okay, but you read the whole book because you like my wife. I've read the book only page 1. That doesn't count. Okay, so 1, 2, I would have expected this chess players to have read the book. It's a fascinating book on strategy. A brilliant book, and I honestly advise that every single Namibian must read this book. It brings you so much understanding of the environment we find ourselves in, and the environment that every country finds themselves in. Good, and it's about the oranges of power, prosperity, and poverty. The last one being the most important one. So why do nations fail? Those who've read the book, you're not allowed to answer. Why do you think, very shortly, 5 words, give me just a word. Why do you think some nations fail? If you would think about a common fact that you see amongst failed nations in the world. Power, corruption,
inequality.
Say again?
Inequality.
Inequality?
Poor leadership.
Poor leadership. Inefficiencies. Sorry, say again?
The lack of unity.
The lack of
Unity.
unity. It's a good one. So, as Affirmative Robinson kind of explored quite a few theories, and they went back thousands and thousands of years ago. That is what makes the book so exciting. Because we look at our situation today, at Russia, at America, at NATO, and our whole environment is currently a snapshot of the world. And they say, well, that's not necessarily an explanation of anything. Let us go and look at all the nations in the world, going back thousands of years, even before Christ. And let's see whether we can find commonalities there. And there's a lot of theories in the world: location, type of governance, leadership, corruption. A lot of the book is about corruption, and it actually comes back to their final conclusion, if you may, on why nations fail. And it's summed up in that: institutions of extraction. Now, in that word or phrase lies a lot. There's a lot to unpack, and I found it apt to put that little Sabir cartoon for you, because you might also recognize in our local setting some similarities there with who actually enjoys the protection and the whistleblowers not enjoying any protection. We have an act, but there's not enough money to enact it. We also have an Access to Information Act, but there's also not enough money to enact that. But we can sponsor the National Defence Force with $6.5 billion. I think there's a lot of money for a lot of other things. But when it comes to actually guarding against institutions of extraction, government is very, very skewed. And they are lethargic in putting things in place that can actually guard against what Azamugo described as the key factor that caused nations to fail, and will forever cause nations. All right, so there you go. You know exactly what that one is about. So what is an institution? What are we talking about if we talk about institution of extraction? It's a system or a scheme or an institution or a practice put in place through public power to extract, or just commonly known, loot public assets for the benefit of a few connected elites on the back of some legitimate mandate and false narratives. Our report also talks quite a lot about false narratives. There's a lot of false narratives in our country that government is there to, you need government to protect you because there's so many evils of the past and currently. If you don't have this government, there's going to be a lot of problems, not problems. There's a lot of false narratives being put out there, and a lot of people obviously believe it because they sound popular, they make you feel nice. And then the legitimate mandate. We have to put this institution in place because as leaders we feel that's the right thing to do because these are the problems, therefore that institution is needed. Okay? But ultimately a few benefit at the expense of the rest of society. How is this possible? Because we are talking about the looting of public assets by a few people, a small group in our society. How is this possible? Surely we're all going to say, hey, that's my stuff, leave it alone. I see what you're doing there. But if somebody starts stealing our public assets, we will say, okay, now we see you stealing. But you just continue stealing and it doesn't stop. How is that even possible? Because we know it's happening. We know it's happening on a grand scale in the middle. Very simple. You have political influence, I call it capture, of your law enforcement agencies. Because if something went to the ACC for investigation, and the ACC says there's nothing, then what? If you then go to the police say, well, this looks like a corruption issue, you must go to the ACC, but the ACC says, but there's nothing. If you go to the financial intelligence sector, or the ombudsman, or now you can start naming whoever else is in the law enforcement sphere, there's just nothing going to happen. So the moment you have captured institutions, the highway opens up for the creation and sustainability of institutions of extraction, and now we know where that ends, failed state. Okay? As Affirmative says, the institutions that permit the elite to rule over and exploit others, extracting wealth from those who are not in the elite. Okay? Let's look at examples. The glaring, most obvious example, colonial powers. That was a grand global institution of extraction. I come there, I exert power, and I start to extract resources for my own benefit. I let you know, let you feel somehow that it's in your benefit, but in the meantime, while we sort out whose benefit this is, we load the ships and we go. I don't know if you've seen the book launch of Fish Rod yesterday by the Namibian. Was it yet?
Today, yes.
No, yesterday. It was yesterday.
It's in book there.
Yeah, no, I want to definitely get a copy of that. So, Roman Greenberg, he was for a long time at the University of Namibia. He's now back to Europe. Long before Fish Rod, he studied the fisheries industry and fish stocks and a lot of things around that industry. And in that book, he also describes how Namibia's fish stocks were decimated in the 60s and 70s by South Africa, Spain, and Russia. Those three countries took what they could get for that time. And many of them stayed behind it. In fact, all of them stayed behind. If you take those three countries' ships out of our waters today, there's very few left. So, colonial powers definitely was the grand example of institutions of extractions. Of course, this happened long before colonization even started. If you read Why Nations Fail, this went back to the feudal ages in Europe. The abuse of power, there was a king and the people just had to work and bring everything to the king. Even the exploration ages, the king sponsored the ship, whatever the ship could bring back would belong to the king. If you could bring gold from the Incas, that was the king's property. So those institutions of extraction, very, very old. Let's come local, Fish Rod. What was the legitimate mandate? Government objectives. Oh, it's so beautiful. Drought, poverty. There's so many things under that. And we all feel nice because government's doing something. No, it was just looting. SME Bank, easier access to finance for small and medium enterprises, especially the previously disadvantaged. What happened? Rand theft. Full stop. The money started at SME Bank was 99% public funds, because what did they do at SME Bank? They wrote letters to public institutions, municipalities, regional councils, all the SMEs, funds. I've seen these letters, so I'm talking about from a position of authority on this. Please invest in the SME Bank. And then they would, some of those institutions would question us and say, but you're not giving us enough interest. And then they said, no, not a problem, we'll give you 3% more. Many of them said, this is a government bank, we are government, we must stick together, we must support it. So more than 1.5 billion, that I'm not 100% sure, but there's definitely more than that, went into the SME bank from our funds, our money, the public's money. The monies that were stolen at SME bank was not just depositors. The depositors were us, we, the public, grand institution of extraction. All right. So this report, you might think I'm drifting away from the topic, was an analysis of the Affirmative Action Employment Act and Employment Services Act, and specifically regulations that were passed last year. And those regulations, essentially, they just a little paragraph, so I can just tell you what it said. You don't have to read the regulations. From now on, relevant employers, in terms of the Affirmative Action Act, and designated employers, in terms of the Employment Services Act, who employ 10 or more people, must comply with those two laws. That's all the regulations. All right? So where you had before those regulations in September 25 or more employees and had to comply with those laws, you now have to comply if you have 10 or more employees. In other words, far more businesses. In fact, we estimate that about 60% of the Namibian businesses fall within that bracket will now have to comply. Good. So, just I'm going to go into a bit of the detail of those acts a bit later on, but just from a general statement that there's increased compliance for a huge amount of business in the movement. Tell me, what do you think will be the natural consequences? Just from the statement, businesses have more compliance requirements. Just logic, naturally. If you lean this chair over, eventually it's going to fall. That's a natural consequence. What will be the natural consequence, or consequences, of course, there's many, of more and more businesses having more and more compliance requirements? Okay, over.
More cost to operation.
More administration?
More cost to operation.
More cost to operations?
No money excluded to make it possible.
Yeah.
And people appointed.
Business becomes more expensive? Ways to bypass the laws? The risk of just being non-compliant, which then follows onto criminal sanctions. All right. I haven't done any positive. You see I'm standing here not because I'm going to tell you how great this is. Yeah. All right, so we'll get back to that a bit later. Let's quickly do a quick reality check. The Namibia reported last year that Namibia's youth unemployment is currently 50%. I've spoken to a few economists. It's very likely closer to 60%. The youth in our country is 18 to 34. 60% of those people in our country, they make up a huge chunk if you look at our demographic distribution, a huge chunk of our population, right? I understand that some politicians who are 70, 80 years old think that they are the most people, but they're simply not the most people in our country. That's a big problem. The latest NABER survey, which was released in 2018, showed that the youth unemployment was 46.1%. Unfortunately, they didn't have another survey because why? Government doesn't have enough funds. Ironic. Youth unemployment in 2013 stood at 43% according to the survey. So this is actual surveys, actual data. And 2012 at 39. Can you see the trend? It's climbing. It's not coming down, it's climbing. We're not dealing with the problem. The problem is being exacerbated somehow. It's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So, at an estimated 33.4%, well, at an actual, sorry, that's wrong, at an actual 33.4% general unemployment, that's youth and older, at 2018, and likely now over 40% unemployment, and I was asked to say that general unemployment is probably now at 50% already. Namibia is the worst in the world. We have the highest unemployment figure in the world. I don't know what feeling that instills, but being the best isn't always the best thing. That's bad. That's really bad. And we should be extremely concerned. Okay? That's the reality check. 86,000, and that's a very, very moderate estimation of our graduates today in Namibia, the jobless. 33 years ago, we sat with a massive problem. Because of past discrimination, white people had a major advantage, not only in business and access to the resources, but in education. And people of color, and even white women to some extent, to an actual large extent, didn't have access to education as the white males did. Now, 33 years later, 86% of graduates, 99% of those are graduates of color, cannot find a job in their own country. It's shocking, it's deplorable, it's shameful, and our leaders, when they get together, what do? I cannot fathom what goes through your mind with this being the reality and you finding some joy in that. 23.8% of educated Namibians were unemployed in 2018. In 2014, that was 7.8%. Can you see the drastic worsening of the situation that we have? I don't think that has improved because that was before COVID. That was before inflation crept in because of the Ukraine war. That was before a few other problems that we faced externally. Unemployment amongst postgraduates increased from 0.9%. In fact, almost nobody was unemployed amongst the postgraduates. Now stands at almost 10%. It's not now, 2018, it's now even worse. Again, these are people exceptionally well qualified. They cannot find jobs. So, we'll explore the problem just now. Still on the reality check. 25% of our country's dwelling units are informal houses. I'm asked not to call it shacks, but that's a direct quote from the Namibian newspaper, so it's not me. I'm really trying my best to be very diplomatic these days. 36.6% of dwellings are detached houses. You know what I'm talking about. Detached houses, so it's a dwelling attached to some other dwelling. So you don't have ownership, but it's very close to just a shack that's built at the back of some other building. That's more than 50%. 42% of households in our country have no toilet facilities. 33 years after independence. 53% of households in Namibia use firewood as their main source of energy. There's no switch to turn on an oven or a microwave. They need wood. We all know what that does to the environment. We've seen it. We also start seeing it in the outskirts of London. Okay, let's get back to but why? Why? Why are we here? What's happening? What is the problem? And the answers are there. You don't have to delve too deep. They are there. We have a lot of data to deal with. We have a lot of clues to deal with. Let's first look at the relationship between extreme poverty and competitiveness. What this graph shows you, that if you are highly competitive, or the more competitive you are as a country, the less poverty you have in your country. It is crucial that your country is competitive. I've heard some politicians say, we don't need the outside world. Reality check again. That is just factually wrong. If you cut yourself out from the outside world, your people will wither and die. Even North Korea depends on outside business. Who do you think built some of these buildings standing out here? North Korea. They cannot cut themselves out of the world. So the more competitive you are, the lower your poverty rates. Namibia's ranking on the ease of doing business. 2006, we were the 40th best country in the world in doing business. You must read those reports. We actually had a paragraph, I think it's World Bank that compiled these reports, had a paragraph dedicated to us to say that the ease of employing people in Namibia and the regulation on employment is some of the best in the world because it is not constraining. That was 2006. That's where we are now. We have dropped substantially. As a businessman and as an advisor to businesses, I'm telling you now, we have an extremely restrictive business environment in our country. Extremely restrictive. Not just slightly. I'm not talking about even, I wanted to name China, but China is actually ranked far better than us. China's got a far more conducive business environment because they've got less regulation that they push down on businesses. We have more. So, let's look at our credit rating. Again, I hear politicians say, but this means nothing. And they bias. And Kali Stefan once said they didn't take everything into account. They have a system. Trust me, they employ their system. You can debate about it, but it's there and it's applied equally. Namibia is junk. We recently moved to junk. That's what the economists call it. More diplomatically spoken and correct will be highly speculative. So if you want, it's like sitting at a roulette table and you have a few chips that you feel that the wife is not going to be too angry about if you lose this, and you put it on red. Let's go. That's where Namibia is in terms of credit ratings. Highly speculative. Not good. Not good. Look where Botswana is, our neighbor. They've done a lot right. We can have a chat about that later. Botswana is doing well for very specific reasons. We took 5 countries, just kind of random, but also make sure that we bring in our neighbor there. In terms of capital investment percentage of GDP, there's the other 5 average, there goes Namibia. Look at the date, 2014. Look at the slump further from 2016. NIF and the Investment Act came in there. Okay, and the Investment Act was already promoted there. And then things went downward. Foreign direct investment, look at Singapore, look at Rwanda, starting to climb. They win. They surpassed us. You know Rwanda's history. A war-torn country, tribalist, extreme. A million people killed on the basis of tribalism alone. They went past Namibia. We should be ashamed. We should be deeply ashamed. 2014. Look, we did well. We did well. There's independence, and we started lifting things up, and we did well, until there. 2014, 15, 16, things just died. People say, are you against SWAPO? I say, how can I ever be against SWAPO? SWAPO did brilliant for our country for 20 years. For 20 years, SWAPO did the unimaginable for our country. And then they started fighting us. That's the reality. It's not me, there's figures. It's there, the evidence is there. 2013, the green part is private sector investment, capital formation. 2013, 14, repeat. And then again, all the wind came out of the tires. The people ran dead. Look, there's your government, public corporations and private. Can you see that the major portion going away was the private sector? Private sector started dying out. Why? Because of policies such as the Investment Act and NIF, where government said, we're going to now redistribute wealth. And private sector said, okay. Private sector, except for a few people like me and a few others that actually just speak too often and too loud. Private sector kept quiet and just slowly moved money out of the country, silently made decisions not to invest, not to build a new farmhouse, not to extend your property inventory, not to get more employees if we're going to sit with this risk. And inevitably that happened. And the current Minister of Justice had a massive argument with me and said, how can you say the economy is going to go down? There's no evidence. I said, the problem is that there's no evidence for something to happen, but the logic will prevail, and it has prevailed. And we still sit with NIF. We still sit with the Investment Act. They haven't gone away. Okay? This graph is foreign direct investment inflows and outflows. The top of the line is bad. Bottom of the line, good. Money came in. That money went up from 2019. 2016 was good, people got a fright, more and more started taking money out. Okay? Look at our global ranking in terms of growth. We were, one is the worst, by the way. Good is there, bad is there. We were good. We were good. We were exemplary good. For an African country, we were good. We've got so many challenges in Africa. That was good. And then 2016, February, NIF came to the table. And I also hear this a lot from the politicians, but it's not a law yet. What's the problem? We're just talking about it. It is because everybody's seeing what you're doing. We see the direction. We can see what you think and direction that you want to take our country in. And if that is the direction that you are thinking of, we are going to make alternative plans. Those alternative plans meant that our investment went dead. Okay, so after all of that, the point I want to make is policy. Government policy matters. Government policy is where we will find ourselves in 10, 20, 30 years. Where our children and their children and their children will find themselves in 80, 100, 200 years from now is the direction that government takes. And that is why government policy is important. All right, what's affirmative action? Now I'm getting back to our report. That's what the report's about. The rest of that was also in the report, but it's important to understand the background. Affirmative action is a set of measures designed for designated groups. Designated groups is pretty much all Namibians except white males. Okay? Because it's all women, all minority groups, all people of color. So white males, they could have just redesigned that and said, it applies to everybody except white males. That's fine, because white males did enjoy the privilege at the time. Right? So all designated groups must enjoy equal employment opportunities and are equitably represented in the workforce. That is what the law says affirmative action is. All right? And then the meaning of equitable, which they use there, that is not defined, but the Oxford Dictionary defined it as a fair and reasonableness and treating everyone in an equal way. Okay. So there's a bit of an anomaly there because the affirmative action law says you must discriminate, but the reason is we must treat everybody equally. But that's fine, we understand why and we proceed from there. According to the Equity Commissioner, the actual goal of affirmative action is demographic representation. That's not written in the law, by the way. It's quite important because you hear that a lot. That this entity must be demographically represented. The workforce must be demographically represented. What does that mean? It's not written in the law for a very specific reason, because it means that 7% is the upper limit that any Herero person in this country, or Herero persons, may be in the workforce. The Damara people, they're also 7% of the country. So no board, the workforce in general, the executive level, the senior management level, no level in the workforce may see more than 7% Damara people or more than 7% Herero people. You understand the regional logic, the demographic representation? Now you see the consequences. And we have warned in 2016, and we had a nice debate in the Law Society's boardroom on this. If you start to discriminate, even if you eliminate a a specific group, then it has a spillover effect. Because the groups that remain will just do the same. And the next group, if that one is eliminated, will do the same. And it's called tribalism. So now you see that more and more in our country. At first, it was the evil white man and his apartheid. And that kind of fizzled out now. And now the tribalism is coming up. Anything that you see on government procurement is tribalism, tribalism, tribalism. What are you doing? You are discriminating against another tribe. It is a very, very dangerous thing. I remind you of Rwanda. Okay. So the unintended consequence of this demographic representation is severe. It's not thought out properly, and it must be revisited. But I will tell you just now why it's in any case one of those false narratives. Okay? So very quickly, I don't want to bore you with the law. What does it mean when we say 10 or more employees employing 10 or more people must now comply with the Act? It means that those businesses, the chunk, 50-60% of Namibian businesses, must now do the following. They have to give preferential treatment to suitably qualified people. Remember, suitably qualified. I also don't think that happens every day. Duty to train Namibians. It's a duty. It's a legal duty. Again, think costs in operations, and if cost goes up, will business and economic growth follow or not? It's not mutually exclusive, but it can be a problem. There's a duty to prepare and submit affirmative action plans. These plans must set out affirmative action objectives of every single business, list numerical goals for the increasing representation of persons in designated groups, establish a timetable for the achievement of these objectives, set out an internal procedure to monitor and evaluate the affirmative action plan, and identify senior employees who will have overall responsibilities for the implementation of the affirmative action plan. So when we talk about you must comply with that law, that's not a nice, just comply with the law. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of expertise that has to go into that. There's a lot of cost that has to go into. Okay. The question is it worth it? What are we achieving by doing this? Is the cost that we put in still justifiable because of the outcome being higher, better, more improved, whatever we want to achieve? And I'll show to you just now that we have missed that boat completely. All right, also, you have a duty to consult unions and so forth. You have a duty to analyze your workforce, review employment practices, and prepare statistical reports. You have a duty to keep records. Inspectors from the Equity Commissioner can enter your office at any time and do investigations in your business. And the Equity Commissioner can receive your action plan and say, I don't approve, for whatever reason. I don't approve it. The Act contains several offences if you don't comply, but most important, if you don't comply, government can come to you as a business and say, oh, I see you have a fishing permit or a license for your vehicle fleet. Everything you do in your business in our country is highly regulated, as I said before. They have the right. Government has the right. Just say, you're not doing business anymore. Thank you. Okay. Not a conducive environment to start a business in Namibia or to grow a business in Namibia. Remember those unemployment figures. Just remember them. Employers must register on a government portal. All employers with 10 or more employees must register on a government portal. It's a legal requirement. It's not a please will you. The law says you must. If you don't, you are criminally liable. Then the employer must list all vacancies and new positions on that portal. And then the employer, if he has any vacancy or new position, must inform the government through that portal, and then must receive the CVs which the Employment Service Bureau provide to the employer. Remember what I said about institutions of extraction. Don't forget that part. All right? Okay. You must give, as an employer, preferential treatment to those CVs that you receive. You can't just go to your friend and say, do you have, my secretary resigned yesterday, can I please, don't you know of a nice girl that can work and help me out for 6 months? Nah, unlawful, criminal. Can you see how we are restricting employment in an environment where our employment figures is the highest in the world? Okay, if you don't do that, it's a criminal offense. Private employment agencies in the Employment Service Act are highly regulated, but they're not only regulated. In other words, their life is not only made very difficult to exist, they actually have to enforce government laws. They may not take your CV and say, I think I have a job for you at ABC Stationers. They must first go to ABC Stationers and do an audit there to see whether ABC Stationers is compliant with all the tax laws and social security laws and labor laws in Namibia. And if they're not, sorry, I can't give you a job there. Extreme restriction on providing employment to our unemployed Namibians. And then this part is, for me, just the worst. So if you have to give the preferential treatment to whoever the Employment Service Bureau provides to you in terms of the CVs of candidates, you must give them preferential treatment. Are you not then discriminating against all the other people who prefer not to go through that portal? Job seekers who send somebody a mail and say, I see in the newspaper you've advertised for a position, can I give my CV to you? If the employer is honest, he will say, thank you for your CV, but I have to actively discriminate against you. Because I have to first see what government provides to me. And I have to first give them first preference. These are both are two Oshibambo speaking ladies. You understand what I'm saying? The discrimination is not color or tribe anymore. It's purely government. And if you don't come to government, then we will put you in a lesser position. It's harsh. It's unacceptable in a free democratic society that we are supposedly living in. So does this sound good to you? Does the whole concept of affirmative action sound good to you? Let's see. Of course there was racial discrimination in the past. It's not denied. We don't deny it in the report, and we will never deny it. I grew up in that era. I know. I'm fortunately older than you guys. You don't have a living memory of it? I do. You may. I don't want to do it. Of course, the past racial discrimination and the results thereof had to be addressed. It had to. We talk about inequality today. In 1990, the inequality was very clearly white people of color. It was, just objectively. Where do you think the inequality lies today? Yes, there's still a lot of inequality between, call it black and white, people of color and white. The biggest inequality lies within the groups, within, let's say, the Oshibambo speaking people, the Herero people. Within those tribes, you will find far more inequality than you have general inequality in our country. Think about it. Because there's a lot of poverty in that group, and there's a lot of wealth also in that same group. So we must also understand the concept of inequality. It's not. The politicians love to use it, but they don't analyze the concept. Right? But at that time, the inequality had to be addressed because of past discrimination. Of course, purposeful action then had to come. It was required. You can't just say, well, let's sit back and see where this thing goes. I fully agree that some action had to be taken. Such action would not have been effective if government did not have some oversight to make sure that, there's some progress. Of course, it was good for new leaders to have been seen to take action. It was politically the right thing to do at the time. And I'm sure that quite a few white people would have agreed with me. At least today, in hindsight. At the time, maybe not that many, but today. So, question is, does the argument stop here? Is that the argument? Because that's where the politicians stop the argument. Because it's a nice argument. Who can argue with it? But it unfortunately goes further. We take the data from the 2018 Equity Commissioner's report. What's my time? I just have this feeling I have to. Woo! Okay. So both the Affirmative Action and the Employment Services Act target only white males. Okay, that's what the law says. Because you have designated groups, but every immigrant falls within that designated groups except white males. Now, you must think, and especially the chess players must think very logically and mathematically. 923 reportable employers, in other words, employers who at the time had 25 employees, reported on a total of 275,000 employees. This is a massive chunk. This includes SOEs, but excludes government, central government. So that's a massive chunk of employees in the Namibia. In total, they employed 6,048 white males, the only target of Affirmative Action and the Employment Services Act. Of that 6,048 white males, 1,571 white males were in senior management and executive director positions. So the whole legal apparatus of Affirmative Action and the requirement to register on portals and prefer government CVs is aimed at only 1,571 immigrants. By the way, they employ more than 20 people at the Office of the Employment Equity Commission. So those 20 people receive salaries every year for this, only for this purpose. 97.8% of the Namibia's workforce, as reported by the reportable employers, come from designated groups already. 97.8%. Is that not enough? Well, will 98 or 99 or 100% be enough? We don't know because there's no sunset clause. Nobody talks about the end of this, it just continues. In fact, I'll show you just now what the Employment Commissioner said. So just working on your average company that reported to the Employment Equity Commission. The average company's got just less than 300 employees. Of the average company that's got 300 employees, 6.5 of them are white males. 6.5 out of 300 employees are white males. 1.07 employees are white males in senior management positions, and 0.6% of the employees at an average company is a white male in an executive director position. Is this the message you're getting from government? Of course not. Is this the message you're getting? This is the data of the Employment Equity Commissioner himself. Okay? But the message gets politically distorted. Just to give that to you graphically, there's the total workforce. There's total white males in middle and lower positions of that workforce. And there's total white males in senior management and executive director positions. That grey part there, that is the only part that is being targeted by the Affirmative Action laws now. 0.5% of our workforce. That is what government says it is justified that we continue with this. And government hasn't stopped. After our report, the Employment Equity Commissioner said we can never stop affirmative action because it is part of our social cohesion. Can you hear the narrative, the false narrative, the objective, the government objective? And it sounds so nice, it rings such a nice bell. It's part of our social cohesion. It is destroying our country. So, what's the consequences? Increased cost to business. The incentive to reduce employees. I don't want to do this compliance, I'm rather going to let a few of them go, and then I don't have to deal with these problems. The disincentive to employ more people. I have 9 employees. If I employ one more person tomorrow, bam, these laws come on me, criminal sanction, they can come do inspections, they can invoke my license to do business. Why would I take that risk? Disincentive to expand your operations. Incentive to bypass the labor laws. All of you got all of this right. Well done. And start with individual contractors. And there's many others. We did a survey, the results of the survey is also the report on what businesses feel about this and what they think they're going to do. More than 90% of them said, we will bypass it. We will find a way to bypass it because the cost of business is just too much. It's just too much. Why must you operate in a country where you struggle, you fight, you literally fight to do business? Well, 60% of your people are unemployed. Can you see that we have a problem in terms of our policy? All right. We mentioned in the report, and I love to say that this comes from the South African state capture investigations. The problem is that ultimately you push incompetence to the margins. You do not employ the best person. There's always some political reason, nepotism, favoritism, there's always some other reason why people get employed, not always, very often. Which means that you might have put the 10th best person there, but the best person could have done perhaps a 10 times better job. And then you start seeing institutions crumble. Then you see it in government very often, right? Every day. Another green scheme, another agricultural project, they just start falling apart because the right people were not put there to manage them. And they had brilliant opportunity, but they don't work. Because we are pushing competence to the margins. The more competent you are, the more you get sidelined. Because we have other objectives. So, overall, these regulations and those two laws in general will increase unemployment. They will hamper business. They will hamper economic growth. And they will reduce our country's competitiveness. I put this slide up to remind you. Thank you, Rainer, for this slide. This was your slide.
Yeah.
Welcome, Rainer. This is the correlation between competitiveness and poverty. If your competitiveness ranking is low, your poverty is high, you will suffer for it. All right, who will suffer the most? The unemployed, currently unemployed, because there's just now more and more barriers to get employment. But also you're currently employed, because businesses are now going to make plans. They're going to start reducing staff. They're going to start splitting their companies up, which is unlawful, but people will find a way because you have made it impossible for them within their means, because businesses don't have this infinite amount of money. To stay within their means, they have to make plans. And ultimately, the current employees may suffer for that. Government debt. This is government debt since 2014. I've shown you the other graphs, some of them also included Rana's graphs. You saw it went well until that point, 2014. Look at our government debt as a percentage of GDP. It has gone off the roof. To the point where many economists say, we bloody hell hope this world and green hydrogen comes through, because otherwise we bugger. That's our only hope. We have, if not for that, already an unsustainable level of government debt. So, what does that mean? Oh yeah, and with junk status. Just don't forget that. We have amongst the top 5 most bloated public services in the world. Worst unemployment, largest bloated government service. There's no more lifelines. Government would love to say, we will provide employment. You know, government will pay. No, the taxpayer will pay. Government will provide employment as if only government can provide employment. Unfortunately, that's still that Marxist thing that shines through now and then. It cannot do it anymore. Time's over. There's no more lifelines. There's only one place that can save Namibia, and that's the private sector, and government is killing the private sector. Every single day, through more and more regulation. Will the activists and the unions come to rescue us? I respectfully tell you, no. For 2 very simple reasons. You can think for yourself. What do they say? They play the populist game. The activists, very much so, the unions to some extent, play the populist game. The activist wants to gain power. They're politicians. They're not activists, they're politicians. Now, if one activist would have been sitting here tonight, I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, that you're also activists, and tell me that you watch this and you understand the problem, that this is the core of our unemployment, then I would say, then there's hope with the activists. But I have not seen one activist who actually analyzed the core of the problem and actually said, we will address the core of the problem. They go and close down businesses. Ironically, huh? We have an unemployment problem. We want to close down your business. But okay, let's leave it there. So no, the activists and unions will not come to your rescue. You support the unions because they will always fight for the employee without, unfortunately our unions are like that, without really taking into consideration the limitations of the employer. So they will always push until that business goes down, and then they step away and say, oops. Okay, but we have more other members that we can help. Be careful for unions. All right. I leave you with this last one, and this is what I want you on to hear. You either have a civil society or you don't. I love that quote. I only found it today. Because my biggest frustration is people phoning me just to